Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to my Finding My Way podcast. This is podcast number 25, titled Embarrassed by the Truth. Embarrassed by the Truth is a story from my adult years. The collection of stories I have written and am reading to you cover many subcultures in our country that I have interacted with from childhood to my adult and senior years. A more extensive introduction to the Finding My Way stories takes place in the beginning of Podcast 1. Regardless of which podcast you are listening to, you will find the story both entertaining and worthy of your reflective thoughts concerning its contents. The stories, as a collection, provide insight into a span of time that has played a role in shaping American culture and influencing its future. The stories provide you with a sense of admiration for the culture's collective courage and our country's commitment to justice and its optimistic willingness to address new challenges. Embarrassed by the Truth. Now, I knew that there was something real to psychic phenomena. I still did not know why it happened, but it clearly did happen. It did not occur on a consistent level as I had encountered it, nor did I have any idea as to the range or limits of the phenomena. I began reading about psychic phenomena during every spare moment I could find. There were not all that many such moments in my working full-time and being a father of 2 children, while also supporting my full-time working wife. However, I could manage an hour or so in the late evenings to devote to my pursuit. My readings included requesting more and more copies of the original transcripts of the Edgar Cayce individual psychic readings. I purchased many paperback books on psychic phenomena as well. Some of these books proposed ideas that were just too impossible to believe. I remember reading one guru's book about meditation and connecting to God. That author stated that you did not need to do hours and hours of meditation each day, say mystic chants, make Om sounds for hours, practice painful yoga positions, and the like to make connection with the Spirit of God. Halfway through the book, the author stated that all you needed to do was to get up each morning, face the rising sun, bend down and touch your toes, and then rise up with your arms outstretched over your head as you state to yourself that you are perfect. You are perfect because that was how God created you. Well, I knew that wasn't true. I knew I wasn't perfect. The concept was so outrageous to me that I closed the book. I had no intention of wasting my time on such silly concepts. I continued attending the Pat Sisson and Fleeman channeling sessions, as well as attending other evening meetings that Pat would put together. Many of those meetings featured invited people with reported psychic abilities presenting on their areas of expertise. An Indian chief explained his belief in the power of the sound of an eagle's feather. Someone spoke on the work Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had been doing in Death and Dying. One woman came who was working with a nationwide research project to determine some facts concerning past life regressions. She came to lead sessions in past life regressions for those who had volunteered to participate in the research. She began by leading the group of people who were in attendance at Pat's house in the standard relaxation activities. Her instructions included taking a very deep breath and then holding it for a few seconds, then very slowly exhaling. As you exhaled, you were to notice that your neck muscles were relaxing, and then your shoulder muscles. Taking another deep breath and then slowly releasing it, you were to notice the deeper relaxation of your neck and shoulder muscles. The instructions continued until all of your large muscle groups were relaxed. Then she directed us to think of a specific time period in the ancient past. At this point, I don't remember the exact time periods, so I'll make some up for demonstration purposes. You will focus on the date 1200 AD, remaining very, very relaxed. You are to focus on the date 1200 AD. Now you will look down at your feet. You will notice if you are wearing footwear. You will notice what type of footwear you have on or the condition of your feet. All of a sudden, I saw some sort of sandals on my feet. My mind went wild. This could not be. I wasn't back in the 1200s. This was my imagination at work. These thoughts brought me out of the relaxed state. The lady continued to give directions about what kind of clothes you were wearing, what you were doing, and so forth. I tried to get back into the relaxed state that the relaxation exercises had put me in, but it never happened. I had lost the experience. When the woman finished with her series of questions, she had the group slowly return to the present and be fully awake. Everyone was excited about his or her experiences. The director of the experiment told us not to discuss our experiences with each other until we had filled out a questionnaire that she was passing out. The questionnaire asked us to write down what we had on our feet, what we were wearing, and other questions that paralleled the directions she had given us during the regression. We would have 2 more regressions, she informed us. We would be given different time periods for each of the regressions, but the questions of those time periods would be the same. When we came out of each of the regressions, we would complete the same questionnaire. For the next regression session, I decided to treat the instructions as a guided fantasy experience. This was a psychological technique I had been taught at the National Training Laboratory that I had attended in Portland, Oregon, a few years earlier. I was not going to try to determine if the so-called regression experience was real or not. I would deal with that after the session had been completed. It worked. I stayed with the entire process of the regression and experienced a fantasy event with each specific instruction. When we had completed the questionnaire for the second experience, our leader led us through the third exercise. I experienced a complete fantasy encounter that fit the time period assigned and filled the questionnaire with my answers. At the end of the third cycle, the woman thanked us for our participation and said we could discuss our experiences with each other if we wished. I knew almost none of the participants. The few I did know were simply those who I had seen at one of Pat's Fleeman sessions. The one connection we all had was that everybody knew Pat or had come to the session with someone who knew her. Several people shared their regression experiences in the most convincing manner. I was impressed with their accounts, but not convinced that they had actually gone back to the specific time periods to relive that lifetime. When I was asked to describe one of my regressions, I chose to tell the one I knew could not be true. For the time frame we had been directed to go back to, I found myself wearing simple sandals and a flowing white tunic of some rough woven fabric that was a little heavy but comfortable. I lived in a cave-like house. The house had been partially built over an opening into the side of a hill. The structure was up high, overlooking the crashing sea below. The wind was blowing strongly from the sea. It was chilly. I had a garden I attended and some sheep I cared for. People would climb up the hill to talk to me from time to time. They were asking me for advice. My mind wanted my location to be in Greece, somewhere on the coast, but it wouldn't accept that location. It seemed to be too cold for the Greek coast. My mind kept telling me that I was on the English coast. Well, that simply could not be, I told my fellow participants. As far as I knew, for that time period, no one lived in houses built over cave entrances, making part of the cave an extension of the interior of the house. And I was an English major in college, I stated. Well, you are wrong, spoke up one man who had been pretty quiet through the various disclosures others had made of their regression experiences. I have a Ph.D. in English. I teach at the college. I have studied England in the time period you are discussing. There were such dwellings on the coast of England at that time. It would have been consistent for you to wear the clothing you described, and to grow a garden, and to tend sheep. That set me back. I was so confident that the regression was only a rich fantasy experience. If this fellow was correct, the regression could have been real. I could have been experiencing a past lifetime. Once again, I was stunned. It was becoming more and more difficult to know exactly what was and was not real concerning the realms of psychic issues. The Edgar Cayce material certainly made the case for past lives. Maybe they were real. I just did not know what to believe and wanted to discuss this and other issues with someone. I could not do that with the people at work. Many of the educators I worked with were born in the rural communities where they worked. Those communities were proudly Christian conservative. Most Christian conservatives I knew were hostile to discussions of psychic phenomena. The potential for damaging my professional reputation was high if I openly discussed that I thought there was some truth to psychic phenomena. In addition, the professional community of psychology in my state seemed to be a highly conservative body. I didn't want it to be widely known that I considered psychic phenomena to be real until I knew where the professional organization stood on the subject. I felt confident that they would not accept anything that was not scientifically proven. I know I would not. Shortly after I was elected to be the regional representative of the State Psychological Association's Board of Directors, the president of the State Association called me. He invited me to ride with him to a Board of Directors meeting in Nashville. He lived in Johnson City and would be driving through Knoxville. We could meet at a truck stop he named. They would not mind my parking the car there for a few days. He also suggested that we share a motel room in Nashville to help reduce the expenses of the association. I agreed. This was risky business. I desperately wanted to discuss all I had been learning and experiencing about psychic phenomena, but I could not reveal my interest to the president of the State Association of Psychologists. Since I considered them to be a highly conservative group, the president of that group would have to reflect those values, or he would not have been elected as their association president, went my reasoning. Our drive to Nashville was pleasant. My colleague talked about his work in the VA hospital and wanted to know more about the new area of practicing psychology, school psychology. As the 2 days of meetings progressed in Nashville, I got to really like this man. He was open to people's suggestions on solving the problems the association was facing at that time. This psychologist simply had a gentle way of valuing various points of view on a topic while bringing those with different perspectives together. This enabled the group to agree upon a single strategy for solving the difficulties. I grew to admire and trust him. Driving back to Knoxville was so much more pleasant than it had been driving to Nashville, now that I knew and trusted my companion. About an hour or so out of Knoxville, he asked me something that prompted me to mention that I had been reading some of the Edgar Cayce material. I was guarded in what I said so as not to reveal that I was devouring the original Cayce readings. My new friend asked me what I had learned recently from my readings. I replied, as blandly as I could, with some small bit of information I had recently discovered in one of his readings. The immediate response from my companion was that he knew about that too. He then provided me with another obscure fact about Edgar Cayce's readings that I had just discovered less than a week ago. There was no way this guy could casually know that information. He had been obtaining information about Edgar Cayce that only in-depth students of the Cayce material would know. I cautiously stated, "You seem to know a lot about the Edgar Cayce material." "Oh, yes. My wife and I have been to the Edgar Cayce Center at Virginia Beach many times over the years. We are longtime friends with Hulin Cayce, Edgar's son. We raised our children according to the Cayce materials. They regularly attended Cayce Foundation summer camps as they were growing up. We've raised them according to the principles of the Cayce material." My God, I thought. I have kept myself from learning from this man all this time while I was bursting to talk to someone about this very topic. How I had crippled myself with my fears and false assumptions. The remaining hour of our trip together just flew by. It was such a pleasure to discuss the Cayce material openly with a knowledgeable psychologist. He invited me to visit with him and his wife any time. I really wanted to do that. However, my busy schedule never let that happen. It was disappointing, but my searching and discoveries continued. Pat's husband, Paul, recommended that I read something he had recently discovered. It was called A Course in Miracles. He thought I would find it interesting. After I had asked him what it was about, he went into a lengthy discussion of it. His explanation made me want to reject the thing without opening the first page. First of all, there was not an author listed for it. The author was a psychologist. She was apparently embarrassed to have her name associated with the contents of the book. Then Paul stated that Jesus Christ dictated the book to her. I really respected Paul's opinions, but this was just simply too much. It sounded like one of those faith-healing revival tent things where the preacher pretended to be speaking directly with God or speaking in tongues, having God speak through him. God always spoke through the preacher just before the preacher asked you to be sure to put 10% of your last paycheck in the donation plate. Later, while reflecting on Paul's recommendation and how much I valued him, I decided to buy the book and read it. I could not criticize the material fairly without having read it. I owed Paul that much. A Course in Miracles was actually 3 books. One book was called The Text. It seemed to be much like a college textbook on philosophy, except that it was far outside the realm of reality, as I understood reality to be, that I quickly put it aside. The second book, a workbook for students, contained daily lessons. The lessons were set up something like an operant conditioning program textbook. Using operant conditioning, you might encounter in learning algebra through a series of discrete but systematic lessons that could build upon themselves. The first lesson in A Course in Miracles states, "Nothing I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place, means anything." Then a series of exercises follow that reinforce this concept. The second lesson begins with the statement, "I have given everything that's in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place, all the meaning that it has for me." I like this. It fit into my understanding of phenomenological psychology, the psychological theory that each of us invents our own reality. We form an opinion about what reality is, and then interpret all the information we receive within our personal concept of reality. If we encounter something that does not fit into our concept of reality, we simply deny that it is true. It was from studying the concepts of phenomenological psychology that I understood more fully the maxim, "If you believe it, you have made it true for you." The last book, the third book of A Course in Miracles, was called A Manual for Teachers. It was clear that I was not a teacher of the Course in Miracles. Thus, the obvious book for me to begin my study of A Course in Miracles was Book 2, a workbook for students. I started the daily lessons. While I tried to remember to do the recommended exercises throughout the day, I couldn't remember to do them during the recommended time intervals. My life was too busy. Everything seemed to be going pretty well with the daily lessons, until I'd gotten about a third of the way into the book. I don't mean that I accepted the ideas totally, but I at least considered them to be within the realm of believability. When the daily lessons shifted from telling me that I was not perceiving what was real to then telling me what the truth was, I had a problem. First of all, I didn't like anyone telling me what I should believe. All of the different communities and cultures I had grown up in had their own concept of what was true. Those communities, those subcultures, were not about to let a new kid who had just moved into the neighborhood tell them that in the last place he had lived, they didn't believe what these people believed, and everyone got along fine. The new community the child had just joined would want to punish the child for challenging that community's knowledge of truth. No, I was not ready for a book to tell me that my sense of the world was wrong, and now it was going to tell me what the real truth was. This was where I would start to confront my friend Paul mentally about the merits of A Course in Miracles. First, I had to read the material and understand it before I could formulate a reasonable set of arguments against the Course and disprove its concepts. Some 40 years later, I am still studying A Course in Miracles. Over time, I've come to accept the Course's concepts, but still am learning what they actually mean. I realize that this is a confusing statement, but it accurately reflects my state of mind. 5 years or so after I had begun to study A Course in Miracles, I had a chance encounter with another person who had read the material. At one of the monthly Fleeman sessions, a youngish to middle-aged woman sat down beside me on the couch in Pat's living room. I hadn't seen her at any of the other Fleeman sessions. I was still a little self-conscious about being at a channeling session. I thought too many people would condemn such behavior. They would consider the attendees to be part of a cult. I simply didn't want to have to defend myself to them. I was cautious about whom I let know of my interest in psychic phenomena. Trying to be pleasant, I introduced myself as Jerry to the lady. We shook hands. She seemed pleasant enough to me. After sharing her name, she proceeded to tell me that she was an emergency room physician. She had seen many miracles in her medical practice and knew that there was a greater reality than what we could ever imagine with a paradigm limited by the 3 dimensions of our world. Unlike me, she was very open about her beliefs in psychic phenomena. I decided to risk revealing that I was more than a casual seeker of information about psychic phenomena. However, a degree of caution was still a part of me. I stated, "I've found a set of books recently that have captured my interest. They are collectively called A Course in Miracles. Have you heard of them?" "Oh, yes. I've read them in 4 days. I found them to be too elementary for where I am. I am into much more theoretical information." I didn't have much to add to her statement. I had a lot of inner thoughts about her comments, but decided that it would be best to keep them to myself. Perhaps I am a slow learner. If that is the case, and it has taken me a long time to integrate the principles of the Course into my daily life, there is at least one positive thing I can say about my studies in this material over all these years. I am persistent. Not long after this encounter with the emergency room physician, Pat Sisson informed me that she had been invited to speak about her work as a psychic on a local morning TV show. She was going to be interviewed on the live broadcast at 6 a.m. Pat went on to say that she would like for me to be with her during the interview. She wanted me to be interviewed along with her. I could verify some of her remarkable stories. Pat was my friend. She had true psychic abilities. I did not want to be known to the general public as a believer, not because I lacked conviction in the truth of what Pat had done as a psychic, but because I feared that the rural communities and school systems in which I worked would misperceive what Pat and I would be trying to communicate. My appearing on the TV show would hurt the Educational Cooperative as an organization. I was also concerned about being identified as a licensed psychologist. What if the State Psychological Association challenged me as representing that the field of professional psychology supported psychics? I was immediately confronted with a host of conflicting issues within myself. Was I going to stand up and support what I had learned to be true about the reality of psychic phenomena? Or was I going to yield to social pressure, abandon my friend, and stay silent rather than support the truth? I agreed to appear on the TV show. As the morning of the show approached, my anxiety grew. I imagined all of the negative consequences that could happen to me and my family as a result of supporting this controversial truth. I had to stand for truth. I had to support my friend and speak up for the truth. That was all there was to it. Clearly, Pat was the focus during the TV interview. I was simply introduced as a friend who had attended the Fleeman sessions and had observed some of Pat's predictions to come true. That was about it. I was never described as being a psychologist. Towards the end of the interviewer asked me if Pat's stories were accurate. I said they were, simply because they were. That was all there was to it. I was relieved that my involvement in the TV interview was so brief and that I didn't have to worry about being a licensed psychologist. All I had to worry about was the potential of negative reactions from the school personnel I worked with in my rural communities. A full day's work lay ahead of me after the early morning TV interview. I would be traveling to several of those school systems. If there was going to be reaction to my being on the TV show, it would come quickly. Just about the entire workday had passed without one teacher, principal, supervisor of special education, or superintendent acknowledging that I had been on the TV show, let alone criticizing me for supporting the truth of some psychic phenomena. I was relieved. The last school system I had to visit for the day was about 40 miles out from Knoxville. I needed to meet with the system's supervisor of special education. She was a very kind person who had been born and raised in the community. Above all the people I knew in that part of the state, she was the most representative of that culture. She was approaching retirement age and had observed many changes in her community. I liked her and trusted her judgment. As I walked into her office, she looked up at me and said, "I saw you on TV. We had the TV on this morning as we were getting ready to go to work. I heard them mention your name. I called to my husband to get in here quick. He needed to hear what you had to say. I told him you always told the truth, no matter how hard it was to tell the truth sometimes. If you were going to comment on this psychic stuff, it would be the truth. We heard you say it was true. I think you're right. Now let's get to work on planning for this handicapped child." How foolish I was to worry as I did. I felt like Grover, the main character in the Sesame Street children's book. There is a monster at the end of this book. Through all of the pages of the book, except the last one, Grover pleads with the reader not to turn the next page because there's a monster at the end of the book. Once you get to the end of the book, the reader discovers that Grover is on the last page. He's the monster. Grover confesses to the reader, "I am so embarrassed." Well, I can only say, me too.